Admiral Marcus Kane stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty watching the stars through the massive viewing window. The ship moved through space like a metal giant among the darkness. Kane had served in Earth's fleet for 30 years, but nothing had prepared him for what happened next. The bridge lights dimmed suddenly and every screen showed the same thing. A tall figure appeared made of blue light. It had no face but spoke with a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Commander Lisa Hayes ran to her station and checked the readings. No ship was near them. No signal was coming through their communication systems. Yet the being spoke to them as clearly as if it stood beside them. "We are the Zephyrian Collective," the figure said. "We have watched your species for many cycles of your sun. You have grown beyond your world and spread to others. This concerns us greatly." Kane stepped forward and tried to keep his voice steady. "Who are you, and what do you want with humanity?" The blue figure turned toward him, though it had no eyes. "We are the shepherds of this galaxy. We guide young species toward peace. We have helped 47 civilizations find harmony. Now we offer the same gift to humanity." Hayes worked at her console trying to trace the signal. She found nothing. The alien spoke directly into their minds somehow. She looked at Kane and shook her head. They were dealing with technology far beyond their understanding. "Your species shows dangerous traits," the figure continued. "You fight among yourselves. You compete rather than cooperate. You explore not from wisdom, but from hunger. These behaviors will bring suffering to yourselves and others if left unchanged." Kane felt anger rise in his chest. "Humanity has grown beyond our old conflicts. We work together now. We explore because we want to learn and grow." "You misunderstand," the alien said. "Growth itself is the problem. Expansion leads to conflict. Competition breeds suffering. We offer you something better. Join the collective and know true peace." The figure raised what might have been an arm, and the bridge filled with images. Beautiful worlds with crystal cities appeared before them. Beings from different species worked together in perfect harmony. No one fought. No one argued. Everyone moved with the same calm purpose. "These are our member worlds," the figure explained. "Each species chose to accept our gift. They gave up their primitive drives for something greater. War no longer exists among them. Crime is unknown. Suffering has ended. All live in perfect peace." Hayes studied the images carefully. Something about them made her uncomfortable, but she could not say what. The cities were beautiful and the people looked happy. Yet something felt wrong about the way they moved. They seemed too calm, too similar in their actions. Kane saw it too. The beings in the images moved like machines. They went through the motions of life but showed no real emotion. Their eyes held no spark of curiosity or wonder. "What did you do to them?" he asked. "We removed their capacity for violence and competition," the figure said proudly. "We freed them from the burden of aggressive thoughts. They no longer feel anger, jealousy, or the need to fight. They know only peace." "That's not peace," Kane said firmly. "That's slavery." The figure tilted its head as if confused. "You speak from ignorance. We offer your species the same gift. Accept our guidance and we will help humanity reach its full potential. Your technology will advance beyond your dreams. Your people will live for centuries. Disease and death will become rare. All we ask in return is that you submit to the harmony process." "And if we refuse?" Kane asked, though he already knew he would not like the answer. "Then you will be corrected," the figure said without emotion. "Aggressive species cannot be allowed to spread their violence throughout the galaxy. We have never failed to bring peace to a species. Some accept our gift willingly. Others require more direct intervention." Hayes finished analyzing the images and found something that made her blood run cold. In every picture of the peaceful world she could see weapons. Massive ships hung in orbit around each planet. Guard stations stood at every city entrance. The peace was kept by force. The figure noticed her discovery. Security is necessary during the transition period. Once a species fully accepts harmony, the weapons become unnecessary. Most worlds reach this state within 50 of your years. Kane walked to the front of the bridge and stared at the alien figure. You're giving us an ultimatum. We are offering you a choice, the figure corrected. Accept our gift freely and the process will be gentle. Your people will barely notice the change. Refuse, and we will be forced to use methods that cause more distress. How long do we have to decide? Kane asked. 72 of your hours, the figure replied. This is generous. Most species receive much less time. We respect humanity's achievements even if we cannot allow them to continue. The figure began to fade. Consider carefully, Admiral Marcus Kane. Peace is the greatest gift in the universe. Do not let pride deny your species this blessing. The bridge lights returned to normal and the figure vanished. Kane stood in silence for several moments before turning to Hayes. Send a message to Earth immediately. Emergency priority. Tell them we need to convene the Security Council within the hour. Hayes nodded and began transmitting. Kane looked back at the stars and wondered if humanity would still be free to see them in 3 days. The aliens offered peace, but it came at a price he was not sure his species could pay. They wanted humans to give up everything that made them human. He thought about his daughter back on Earth who dreamed of becoming an explorer like him. He thought about the artists who created beautiful works from their struggles and pain. He thought about the scientists who pushed forward driven by curiosity and competition. If humanity accepted the alien gift, all of that would disappear. The price of peace might be too high to pay. But Kane also knew that refusing might mean the end of humanity entirely. The choice ahead would determine the future of every human being alive and all those yet to be born. The emergency council meeting started within 2 hours of Admiral Kane's message reaching Earth. President Helen Carter sat at the head of the long table in the secure bunker beneath Geneva. Around her sat the most powerful people in human space. Defense Secretary Roy Davis pulled up the recordings from the USS Liberty on the main screen. Everyone watched the blue figure deliver its ultimatum in silence. Senator Paul Kim was the first to speak after the recording ended. We have to be realistic about this situation. These aliens have technology we cannot match. They claim to have guided dozens of other species. Fighting them would be suicide. General Frank Stone slammed his hand on the table. So we just give up everything that makes us human? Let them turn us into walking corpses like those people in the images? Better walking corpses than actual corpses, Kim replied. At least our species would survive in some form. Colonel Amy Brooks stood up from her chair. I've studied those images carefully. Look at the faces of the so-called peaceful beings. They show no joy, no creativity, no spark of life. That's not survival. That's a living death. President Carter raised her hand for silence. Dr. Susan Walsh has been studying the transmission data. Doctor, what did you find? The elderly scientist stood and activated her tablet. Images of brain scans appeared on the wall screen. I analyzed the biological signatures hidden in the alien transmission. The harmony process they mention appears to involve direct alteration of neural pathways in the brain. Specifically, they target areas responsible for aggression, competition, and what they call primitive drives. What exactly does that mean? Carter asked. Walsh highlighted different areas of the brain scan. It means they don't just remove violence. They remove the capacity for any strong emotion. The areas they target control passion, creativity, curiosity, and the drive to achieve. The conditioned beings would lose the ability to create art, music, or literature. They would stop asking questions or seeking new knowledge. They would become perfectly content with whatever they were given. Senator Kim shifted uncomfortably in his seat. That might not be entirely bad. Think of all the problems caused by human ambition and competition. Wars, crimes, environmental destruction. Maybe we would be better off without those drives. Colonel Brooks pulled out a data pad. I ran those images through analysis software. In every single picture of the peaceful worlds, I found evidence of stagnation. The same buildings appear in photos taken decades apart with no changes or improvements. The same ships, the same technology, the same everything. These species stopped growing the moment they accepted the harmony process. Captain Danny Rodriguez joined the meeting by video link from his ship, the USS Defiant. Admiral Kane ordered me to investigate the nearest collective world. We arrived 12 hours ago and requested permission to land. They granted it immediately. Too immediately. The screen switched to show Rodriguez's footage from the alien world. Beautiful crystal buildings stretched toward the sky. The streets were perfectly clean. Beings from different species worked together without any sign of conflict. But something felt wrong about the entire scene. "Watch their eyes," Rodriguez said as he zoomed in on various individuals. "They look through you, not at you. I spoke to dozens of them. They answered my questions but never asked any in return. Not one showed any curiosity about who I was or where I came from." He switched to another recording. "I found a building that used to be a museum. Inside were artifacts from this species' history before they joined the collective. They had been artists, explorers, inventors. Their early work showed incredible creativity and passion, but nothing new has been created in over 200 years. President Carter watched the footage with growing horror. What happened to their children? That's the worst part, Rodriguez said. I asked to see a school. The children sat in perfect rows listening to lessons about harmony and peace. They never laughed, never played, never showed any of the energy we expect from young people. When I tried to engage them in conversation, they just stared at me with empty expressions. Senator Kim still looked unconvinced. But they seemed happy. Content. Maybe that's better than the chaos and suffering of our current existence. Dr. Walsh shook her head. Contentment is not happiness. These beings have been lobotomized in the name of peace. They retain their intelligence and their ability to work, but they've lost everything that makes existence meaningful. General Stone activated his own presentation. Our intelligence network has been gathering data on the collective for the past 18 hours. We've identified at least 15 member species and traced their histories. Every single one showed the same pattern. First contact, followed by a period of negotiation, then either willing submission or forced compliance. The images on screen showed before and after pictures of different worlds. The before images showed diverse, vibrant civilizations with unique architecture and art. The after images all looked similar, clean, orderly, and completely lifeless. The species that resisted initially were subjected to increasingly harsh methods. Stone continued. Orbital bombardment of military targets, followed by ground invasions, followed by mass conditioning facilities. In the end, they all submitted. Colonel Brooks added more data to the presentation. But here's something interesting. The collective has never faced a species quite like humanity. Most of the others were either pacifist by nature or had already achieved some form of global unity before first contact. Humanity is the first species they've encountered that combines advanced technology with our particular brand of stubborn independence. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the speakers. There's something else. I managed to speak privately with one individual who seemed different from the others. He was from a species that had only been conditioned 50 years ago. For just a moment, I saw something in his eyes. Fear. He whispered to me that some of them still remember what they used to be, but they can't feel it anymore. They know they've lost something important, but they can't remember what it was. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. President Carter looked around the table at each face. These people would help her make the most important decision in human history. 72 hours, she said finally. We have 72 hours to decide the fate of our entire species. Do we surrender our humanity for the promise of peace, or do we fight for the right to remain ourselves, knowing we might not survive? Defense Secretary Davis spoke up. Madam President, we should at least explore our military options. Maybe we can't win, but we might be able to make them pay a high enough price that they'll look for easier targets. Senator Kim stood up angrily. This is exactly the kind of thinking that got us into this situation. Always ready to fight, always assuming violence is the answer. Maybe it's time we learn to choose peace over pride. What peace? Colonel Brooks shot back. You saw the footage. That's not peace. That's the end of everything we are. President Carter raised her hand again. We will explore all options, military and diplomatic, but first I want to know what the people think. Open a global communication channel. Let every human being see what we've seen. This decision affects all of humanity. Everyone deserves to have their voice heard. She stood up and looked out at the faces around her. In 72 hours, we will give the collective our answer. Whatever we decide together as one species. And whatever the consequences, we'll face them as one people. The collective ships appeared exactly 72 hours after their ultimatum. They came in perfect formation, massive white vessels that looked more like floating cities than warships. Admiral Kane watched from the bridge of the USS Liberty as 12 of the alien ships took positions around Earth. They were beautiful in their own way, all smooth curves and glowing surfaces. They were also terrifying. President Carter's response had been broadcast to every human world just 1 hour before the deadline. She had stood before the cameras in her simple black dress, looking directly into the lens as she spoke the words that would define humanity's future. The collective offers us peace, but it is the peace of the grave. They offer us safety, but it is the safety of the cage. Humanity chooses to remain human. Now the consequences of that choice were about to begin. The same blue figure that had first contacted them appeared on every human ship and station simultaneously. "You have chosen poorly," it said without emotion. "Your species will be corrected. Resistance will only increase the suffering required to achieve harmony." Kane opened a channel to all human forces. "This is Admiral Kane to all ships and stations. You know your orders. Fight well and die free." The first attack came at Mars. Colonel Amy Brooks commanded the defense of the mining colonies from her bunker deep beneath the red planet's surface. The collective ships descended toward the settlements like falling stars. Their weapons fired beams of pure energy that should have vaporized everything they touched. Instead, the beams struck empty air. The colonists had evacuated to the mining tunnels hours ago. Dr. Leo Green, the chief engineer, had spent those hours turning mining equipment into weapons. The massive drilling machines that carved through solid rock became artillery pieces. The explosives used for mining became improvised bombs. The ore haulers became ramming vehicles loaded with every dangerous chemical the miners could find. The collective forces landed expecting to find cowering civilians begging for mercy. Instead, they found empty settlements and deadly traps. Mining charges exploded under their landing craft. Hidden laser drills fired from concealed positions. Human defenders poured out of tunnel entrances that appeared from nowhere. The aliens had superior technology, but they fought like machines. They moved in predictable patterns, took cover in logical positions, and responded to threats in efficient ways. The humans fought like madmen. They used tactics that made no logical sense. They sacrificed valuable equipment for minor gains. They took insane risks for psychological advantage. Captain Jake Morrison led the evacuation of the outer colonies aboard his transport ship New Horizon. The vessel had been designed to carry families and supplies, not fight wars. But Morrison's crew had spent the last 3 days turning their peaceful ship into something else entirely. Engineer Bob Taylor had rigged the cargo bays with explosive charges. Pilot Nancy Kim had programmed the navigation system to ram enemy ships if necessary. When 3 collective vessels moved to intercept them, Morrison did something no rational captain would do. He flew directly toward the largest enemy ship at maximum speed. The aliens prepared to capture what they assumed was a surrendering transport. Instead, they got a ship full of desperate humans who had nothing left to lose. The New Horizon's cargo bay doors opened and released a cloud of metal debris mixed with industrial chemicals. The mixture struck the collective ship's shields and created a massive electromagnetic pulse that overloaded their systems. In those few seconds while the enemy ship was blind, Morrison's gunners fired every weapon they had directly into the alien vessel's engine section. The collective ship exploded in a ball of white fire. It was the first of their vessels to be destroyed in over 300 years. The news spread across human space instantly. The aliens could be killed. Their technology was advanced but not magical. If humans were willing to pay the price, they could fight back. On Earth's moon, General Frank Stone watched the defense satellites engage the collective fleet. The human weapons barely scratched the enemy shields, but that was not the point. The point was to make the aliens use their full power, to learn their capabilities, to find weaknesses that could be exploited later. Lieutenant Commander Rick Turner led a team of Special Forces operatives in an assault on a collective monitoring station. They moved through the asteroid belt using mining equipment as camouflage. When they reached their target, they found it defended by automated systems and a few alien technicians. The defenses were perfect against a logical attack. They were useless against humans who were willing to die to complete their mission. Turner's team planted nuclear charges throughout the station and transmitted everything they found back to Earth before the facility exploded. The data they recovered showed that the collective relied heavily on central coordination. Their ships and troops received constant updates from command nodes. Disrupt those nodes and entire fleets might become confused and vulnerable. But the price of resistance was becoming clear. The Mars colonies were burning. The outer settlements had been overrun. Millions of humans were dead or captured. The collective response was exactly what they had promised. They were correcting humanity through overwhelming force. Dr. Susan Walsh worked frantically in her laboratory beneath Geneva. She had been studying the alien technology captured from destroyed ships. The collective used some form of quantum communication system that allowed instant coordination across vast distances. If she could find a way to jam or disrupt that system, human forces might have a chance. Commander Lisa Hayes coordinated the defense of Earth's orbital platforms. The massive industrial stations that built humanity's ships were under constant attack. The aliens seemed to want them intact, probably for use after humanity's surrender. That gave the defenders an advantage. The collective had to be careful with their weapons while the humans could use any tactic, no matter how destructive. Hayes ordered the platforms to ram themselves into enemy ships when their ammunition ran out. The sight of entire space stations flying like missiles toward the alien fleet sent a clear message. Humanity would destroy everything rather than let it fall into collective hands. Captain Danny Rodriguez fought a running battle through the asteroid belt. His ship, the USS Defiant, was damaged and running low on supplies but still fighting. His crew had learned to use the asteroids themselves as weapons. They would hide behind large rocks, then use mining charges to send huge chunks of stone flying toward enemy ships. It was crude but effective. The battle raged for 6 days. The collective had expected easy victory within hours. Instead, they found themselves fighting the most vicious and unpredictable enemy they had ever encountered. Human forces were outnumbered and outgunned, but they refused to break. Every defeat only made them fight harder. On the 6th night, President Carter addressed what remained of humanity from her bunker. "We have shown them that we will not go quietly into their peaceful darkness. Every human who has died in the last week has died free. That is something they cannot understand and something they cannot take away." The collective primary harmonizer called for a council of war. For the first time in centuries, they faced an enemy that fought with passion instead of logic. These humans seemed to become more dangerous when cornered, more creative under pressure. They used their emotions as weapons in ways that defied all understanding. The war was far from over. But something had changed in the galaxy. Other species on collective worlds heard whispers about the fire speakers who dared to fight back. Some began to remember what they had lost when they accepted harmony. Deep in their conditioned minds, old dreams began to stir. The rebellion began with whispers in the deep places of collective worlds. On the crystal planet of Zeph Prime, a being that had once been called Hyssek 9 by his own people found himself staring at images broadcast from human space. The reptilian creature had been harmony conditioned for 40 years. He should have felt nothing but peaceful acceptance at the sight of violence. Instead, something stirred in the depths of his modified mind. Captain Danny Rodriguez received the first secret transmission while hiding his damaged ship behind a frozen moon. The message was brief and came through channels the collective should have been monitoring. "We remember fire," it said in broken human language. Some of us still remember. Admiral Kane brought the news to Earth's Emergency Command Center. Dr. Susan Walsh analyzed the transmission and confirmed it was genuine. Somewhere in collective space, members of conditioned species were beginning to break through their mental programming. The sight of humans fighting impossible odds was awakening something that the aliens thought they had destroyed forever. General Frank Stone saw the military possibilities immediately. If we can coordinate with resistance movements on collective worlds, we might be able to hit them from inside their own territory. They've never had to deal with internal rebellion. The collective leadership was indeed struggling with concepts they had not encountered in centuries. The primary harmonizer convened an emergency council for only the third time in their recorded history. The secondary voices raised concerns about the efficiency of the correction process. Some suggested that humanity might be fundamentally different from previously encountered species. Their emotional responses seemed to intensify under pressure, rather than diminish, reported the tactical coordinator. Standard pacification techniques are producing the opposite of their intended effect. The more force we apply, the more creatively they resist. The tertiary sustainers presented data that troubled the council. 17 member worlds have reported minor disturbances since the human conflict began. Previously conditioned beings are displaying behavior patterns that suggest partial restoration of pre-harmony mental states. This was unprecedented. The harmony process was supposed to be permanent. Once a species accepted peace, they remained peaceful forever. The idea that old emotions and drives could somehow return was theoretically impossible. Lieutenant Commander Rick Turner led a covert mission to one of the disturbed worlds. His team used captured collective technology to disguise their ship and approach undetected. What they found exceeded their wildest hopes. Small groups of formerly conditioned beings were meeting in secret, sharing fragments of memories from their time before harmony. Turner met with a group of these rebels in an abandoned building that had once housed their species' greatest artists. The walls still showed faded murals from the time before conditioning, ghostly reminders of the creativity that had been stripped away. "We cannot feel as we once did," explained their leader, a tall being with silver skin and dark eyes. "The harmony process still controls our emotional responses, but we can remember feeling, and we can choose to act even without the old fire that once drove us." These partial rebels could not fight with the passion that fueled human resistance, but they could provide intelligence, sabotage key systems, and most importantly, they could inspire others. Every act of rebellion, no matter how small, proved that the harmony process was not absolute. Captain Jake Morrison found his ship surrounded by collective vessels while trying to evacuate refugees from a mining station. The odds were hopeless. His weapons were nearly exhausted and his engines were damaged. Any rational captain would have surrendered to save the lives of his passengers. Morrison was not feeling rational. He opened communications with the collective fleet and delivered a message that would be remembered long after the war ended. "You want us to be peaceful. You want us to be logical. You want us to surrender because fighting is hopeless. Here's what we think of your peace." The New Horizons engines flared to maximum power, and the ship accelerated directly toward the largest collective vessel. The aliens had seconds to decide whether to destroy a ship full of refugees or let it ram their flagship. They chose wrong. Morrison's ship struck the alien vessel at the point where its main weapon systems connected to the power grid. The explosion tore through both ships, killing Morrison and his entire crew along with hundreds of collective personnel. But it also sent a message that echoed across the galaxy. Humans would rather die than accept false peace. The news of Morrison's sacrifice reached every human settlement and many collective worlds within hours. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, Governor Mary Phillips made a decision that would change everything. Instead of trying to defend her planet's cities, she ordered the complete evacuation of all population centers. When collective forces arrived expecting to begin mass conditioning of the population, they found empty buildings and silence. The Baikai. Humans had vanished into the planet's extensive cave systems, taking everything valuable with them. The aliens controlled the surface, but the real world lay underground, where human miners had carved out a hidden civilization. Dr. Julie Martinez worked around the clock in her mobile laboratory, analyzing every piece of collective technology the Resistance had captured. She made a crucial discovery about their quantum communication network. The system required periodic synchronization pulses to maintain coordination across vast distances. If those pulses could be disrupted at the right moment, entire fleets might lose contact with their command structure. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Emma Scott had been a high school physics teacher before the war. Now she worked as a code analyst in the Resistance Intelligence Network. She noticed a pattern in the collective communication system that reminded her of something from her old textbooks. "It's like a musical chord," she explained to Martinez. "Different frequencies all harmonizing together to create the final signal. But what happens if you introduce a note that doesn't belong in the chord?" Martinez understood immediately. Dissonance. The whole system would try to correct itself, creating interference patterns that cascade through the network. Working together, they developed a weapon unlike anything the collective had faced. Instead of trying to destroy their ships through brute force, the humans would attack their ability to think and coordinate as a unified entity. The first test came during the Battle of Europa. Admiral Kane led a desperate defense of Jupiter's ice-covered moon, while Martinez prepared her dissonance weapon. Human forces were outnumbered 5-1, but they had something the collective did not expect. When the weapon activated, chaos erupted in the alien fleet. Ships that had moved in perfect coordination for centuries suddenly found themselves unable to communicate effectively. Their formation broke apart as individual vessels tried to follow conflicting orders from different command nodes. Human forces struck immediately, concentrating all their firepower on confused and isolated enemy ships. For the first time since the war began, a human fleet achieved tactical victory against superior numbers. The collective ships retreated in disorder, something their species had not done in living memory. The victory at Europa changed everything. Resistance movements on collective worlds received detailed plans for building dissonance weapons using local materials. The technique spread faster than the aliens could respond. Within weeks, uprisings began on a dozen worlds as partially conditioned beings found ways to disrupt local control networks. Colonel Amy Brooks led the liberation of her first collective world with a mixed force of human marines and alien rebels. The planet's defense systems were sophisticated, but depended entirely on centralized control. When the rebels activated their improvised dissonance weapons, the entire network collapsed. The sight of Brooks' forces raising a human flag over a collective city sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. For 3 centuries, no world had successfully thrown off collective rule. Now humans and their allies had proven it was possible, but victory came at a price. The conditioning process could be disrupted, but not easily reversed. The liberated beings could remember their past emotions but could not fully feel them again. They were free but would never be truly whole. In the depths of space, the primary harmonizer made a decision that would determine the fate of every living being in the galaxy. If individual worlds could not be held through conventional means, then perhaps it was time to implement the final harmony protocol. One last gift of peace that would reach every mind in the galaxy simultaneously. The final harmony device was ancient beyond measure, built by the collective's founders when they first chose peace over passion. It had never been used because it had never been needed. The harmony process had always been sufficient to bring order to chaotic species. But humanity had changed everything. Dr. Susan Walsh detected the energy buildup first. Her sensors aboard the research station Hidden Light picked up massive power fluctuations from the collective's homeworld. The readings made no sense until she realized what she was seeing. They're building something that could affect every living mind in the galaxy simultaneously, she reported to Admiral Kane. If they activate it, the war won't just be over. Free will itself will be over. Kane looked at the data and felt ice in his veins. How long do we have? The power curve suggests they need another 72 hours to reach full capacity. But Admiral, this isn't something we can fight with conventional weapons. The device is built into the planet itself. We would need to get inside their most heavily defended world and somehow destroy a machine the size of a continent. President Carter received the news in her bunker command center. Around her sat the survivors of humanity's leadership. The war had cost them so much already. Earth itself was scarred by bombardment. Mars was mostly ruins. Dozens of colonies had been lost. Now they faced the possibility that all those sacrifices meant nothing. Options, she said simply. General Stone shook his head grimly. We don't have the ships left for a direct assault on their homeworld. Even if we committed every remaining vessel, we couldn't break through their defenses. Colonel Brooks had a different idea. What if we don't break through? What if we use their own coordination against them? Every ship in their fleet is connected to the home planet. If we could get a strike team aboard one of their capital ships. Dr. Martinez looked up from her calculations. The dissonance weapon. If we could get it close enough to their central network, the cascade effect might reach the final harmony device itself. But someone would have to deliver it manually. The interference would make remote operation impossible. Kane studied the tactical displays. It's a suicide mission. Whoever takes that weapon to the collective homeworld won't be coming back. Then we'll have to make sure it's worth dying for, Carter said quietly. Across the galaxy, the Liberation War continued. Captain Rodriguez led a fleet of human and rebel ships in hit-and-run attacks against collective supply lines. The aliens were pulling forces back to defend their homeworld, but they still had enough ships to crush any direct assault. On the freed world of Zerion 7, the partially conditioned rebels worked alongside human engineers to build the largest dissonance weapon ever attempted. Hisik 9, the reptilian rebel who had first contacted humanity, supervised the construction. His people had been artists before conditioning. Now they poured their remembered creativity into building something that could bring down the system that had enslaved them. We cannot feel joy as we once did, he told the human technicians, but we can feel purpose. That must be enough. Lieutenant Commander Turner assembled a volunteer crew for the final mission. He did not ask for volunteers. Every human and freed alien in the rebellion asked to go. In the end, he chose a mixed crew that represented every species fighting for freedom. The ship they would use was a captured collective vessel renamed the Defiant Hope. Turner's team had spent weeks modifying it to carry the massive dissonance weapon while maintaining its alien appearance. From the outside, it looked like any other collective ship returning home. Emma Scott worked with Dr. Martinez to calibrate the weapon's final settings. The high school teacher turned resistance fighter had become humanity's expert on collective communication systems. The cascade will take approximately 30 seconds to reach the final harmony device, she calculated. But the collective will detect the interference within 5 seconds. We'll have a very narrow window. Turner understood. Get us close enough and we'll find a way to buy you those 30 seconds. President Carter addressed the crew before they departed. She stood on the hangar deck of the last human carrier, looking at the faces of beings from a dozen different species who had chosen to fight together. You carry with you the hopes of everyone who has ever dreamed of freedom. Win or lose, you have already proven that some things are worth dying for. The journey to the collective homeworld took 6 days. Turner's disguised ship passed through multiple security checkpoints without challenge. The collective's trust in their own technology worked against them. They could not imagine that their enemies would dare infiltrate their most sacred world. As they approached the planet, the crew could see the final harmony device through their sensors. It was beautiful in a terrible way. Crystalline structures rose from the planet's surface like frozen music, pulsing with energy that would soon reach into every mind in the galaxy. Reading massive power fluctuations, reported the ship's alien navigator, a being whose species had been freed only months earlier. The device is almost ready to activate. Turner opened communications with Admiral Kane. This is Defiant Hope. We're beginning our final approach. Tell everyone we said goodbye. Kane's voice came back steady despite the static. Tell everyone you saved hello. The ship's sensors showed collective defense fleets surrounding the planet in perfect formation. Thousands of vessels protected the homeworld in layers of overlapping coverage. But they were all focused outward, watching for an invasion fleet that would never come. Turner guided his ship toward the planet's surface, following standard collective approach protocols. The massive crystals of the final harmony device grew larger in their viewports. Soon they could see individual structures within the complex, each one humming with barely contained power. Beginning weapon activation sequence, Emma Scott announced. Her voice was calm, but her hands shook as she worked the controls. Estimated time to cascade initiation, 4 minutes. The first collective security scan detected anomalies in their ship's power signature. Warning signals flashed on communication networks throughout the system. But Turner's crew had planned for this. They activated their ship's self-destruct sequence and aimed it directly at the heart of the final Harmony device. The collective defense fleet reacted with machine-like efficiency. Energy beams lanced out from 100 ships, striking the falling vessel. But the damage only made Turner's ship fall faster toward its target. "Cascade in 30 seconds, Scott announced as explosions rocked the ship around them. The primary harmonizer watched the human ship's final approach and felt something it had not experienced in centuries: uncertainty. These beings fought with such passion, such desperate hope. Even now, facing certain death, they showed no sign of surrender. 20 seconds, Scott called out. The ship's hull was breaking apart under defensive fire, but the dissonance weapon remained intact. Turner looked around at his crew one last time. Humans and aliens working together, united not by harmony programming but by choice. "Whatever happens next, we chose this," he said. "That's something they can never understand." 10 seconds. The ship struck the crystal matrix at the heart of the final Harmony device. The explosion vaporized Turner's crew instantly, but their weapon survived just long enough to activate. Dissonance cascaded through the collective's communication network like a virus, spreading from node to node at the speed of light. The final Harmony device, designed to bring peace to the galaxy, tore itself apart as conflicting signals overloaded its control systems. The explosion could be seen from orbit as a pillar of light that reached into space. Across the galaxy, collective fleets found themselves cut off from Central Command. Ships that had moved in perfect unity for centuries suddenly operated as individuals. Some continued fighting. Others simply stopped, their crews uncertain what to do without constant guidance. On liberated worlds, the partially conditioned rebels felt something they had not experienced since their conversion: the possibility of real emotion returning. The psychic static that had suppressed their feelings was finally lifting. President Carter addressed the galaxy from her bunker on scarred Earth. "The device that would have enslaved every living mind has been destroyed, but our war was never just about stopping the collective. It was about proving that some things cannot be taken away. Freedom of thought, freedom of choice, and freedom to be ourselves, whatever the cost." Admiral Kane coordinated the liberation of collective worlds as their defense networks collapsed. But the victory was bittersweet. Billions of beings had lived, for centuries under Harmony conditioning. They could not simply return to what they had been before. On the collective homeworld, the primary harmonizer stood among the ruins of the final Harmony device. For the first time in its existence, it felt something like doubt. The humans had been right. Peace achieved through force was not truly peace at all. Years later, the galaxy was still healing. The collective had disbanded, its members choosing their own paths for the first time in millennia. Some species struggled to rediscover emotions that had been suppressed for centuries. Others embraced chaos with joy after so long under rigid control. Humanity helped where it could, but did not try to become the new rulers of the galaxy. They had fought not for conquest but for the right of every being to choose their own destiny.